Microphones are such an amazing thing. So I started thinking about the title for this talk and the topic for this talk after Christmas, right? Christmas supposedly is to celebrate the birth of one of the most amazing wisdom teachers we've ever known, who was all about taking care of yourself, like we talked about, rest, finding stillness, and finding the Spirit of God, or what he called the kingdom within, right? Which is that divinity within us. So it's very interesting that we've turned Christmas into this frenetic, most busy time of the year, and that it's also very commercial, which I guess fits with our capitalist society, right? We're all about turning the wheels of purchasing. So that's what we've turned it into. So it's not only about buy, which takes a lot of time, right? They start asking you, I don't know, people asked me in November, have you got your Christmas shopping done yet? And I was like, well, yes, actually it's almost done. I've bought 3 things and I have 1 left. So kind of keeping it simple. But, so there's all of that buying. We all feel this guilt to go and buy something for everybody. But on top of that, we also have decided that Christmas is the time that you have to have a Christmas pageant and a Christmas concert and a Christmas party and a home party and an office party and a gift exchange and whatever else. So everybody's running around like mad. And that's on top of our already very busy schedules. We are a society of just do it, right? Just do it. Pick up your bootstraps and go out there and do it. We're judged by what we do and what we have. And we judge ourselves often by what we do and by what we have. So that beautiful thing of resting or of sitting quietly somehow has been relegated to like a few people, like the Pope maybe, although he's very busy too. Or, monks, nuns, somebody who's really just dedicated their life to nothing but. And even, it's very interesting. We had a minister at our home church who was an excellent minister, like amazing speaker. But she was criticized because she wasn't available enough to people, because she took a lot of time to go within so that she could really offer amazing talks. So I find that very interesting too, that even a minister is not really allowed to take enough time sometimes to do, what they need to do to enter within so that they can deliver a good speech. So often we view doing nothing, sitting, as lazy or, irresponsible somehow, or even crazy. If you're just sitting somewhere and somebody says, what are you doing? Nothing. They're like, whoa, okay. That's an interesting concept. So that's starting to change. Now, meditation is becoming popular and yoga. But even that, it's like you got power yoga at your lunch break. And you're like, okay, it's time for my meditation because then I got to, check. So, some things are starting to change, but it's still that way. So I really just started thinking about this whole, being versus doing, and how does that all work? Because obviously we also have to take care of our children, we have to take care of ourselves, we got to take care of our home, we got to go work, and we all want to do many other things. We want to learn to play the piano and, read all the books that just came out on the bestseller list, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and do all the things that those bestseller books tell us we should be doing. So it's a challenge to do those things. So it's a very old philosophical question, and I actually, some of you probably saw my Facebook post. I know some of you saw my Facebook post saying, if you have some experience with this, doing versus being, and you'd like to share with me, please do. And 2 different people sent me this lovely little thing that says, Socrates said, to be is to do. Okay, so he was thinking about it way back when. And Sartre, the French philosopher from the, 20th century, early 20th century, said to do is to be. And then another very important philosopher of our time said doobie doobie doo. That's Frank Sinatra. So, yeah, that was a pretty cute thing. But that does point out, that really this is a big question that's been, thought about by great philosophers for a long, long time. So what I think is that we've gotten so busy doing that we've actually forgotten how to be. And I've certainly had this experience and all of that stuff that I mentioned before. I mean, I also many times judge myself by what I have done or have not yet done, or what I have or what I don't have. So it's a hard thing to get away with, to get away from. But what happens is when we forget how to be, we also lose the essence of who we truly are. And when we lose the essence of who we truly are, we actually don't know what it is we're supposed to do. So these two things are really very, very connected. In fact, it is from learning to be that we can actually understand what is ours to do. Being reveals what is ours to do. So from this being, from stopping, from allowing ourselves to be still, comes the knowledge of the divine that is within us. And we talk about this a lot in Unity. We discover what our own divinity is, and through that, what God's will is for us, or our higher power's will, whatever we want to call that. So the first thing that came to my mind when I was doing this was a phrase that I really love from Psalms: be still and know that I am God. And I often offer this up when people ask what unity is, especially if there's quite a few people in the Christian tradition who think that practicing yoga is evil or something. So when asked, what's happening in those rooms, I'm saying, actually, you can just look at the Bible if you'd like, for Christians. It's just be still and know that I'm God. Really, it's nothing more and nothing less. So there's another wonderful phrase that reminds me about this, knowing what is ours to do, coming from being. And it's from Romans: be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, which is very unity. Thoughts and mind produce after their kind. And I found this wonderful translation of that, a longer portion of that passage from the New Living Translation of the Bible, that says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Isn't that a beautiful translation? I really like it. So I was looking in this book, Emily Cady, Lessons in Truth. She is a very early New Thought thinker and was contemporary with Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. And she talked a lot about the knowledge of the light within that comes from stillness. And that this and only this leads to that knowing of God's will and what we need to do in the world. And there's a wonderful passage I just wanted to share with you here. Become like children, so that's from Matthew. And learning how to be still, listen to that which the Father will say to you through the intuitional part of your being. The light that you so crave will come out of the deep silence and become manifest to you from within yourself, if you will but keep still and look for it from that source. So I thought that was a beautiful expression of how stillness can bring us into this intuitive knowing of what God is. And this is also one of my favorite books of late. I've been using it a lot. And there's a wonderful, wonderful yogi named Swami Vivekananda. He was one of the first to bring yoga to the West and spoke at the World Parliament of Religions in, I think it was 1893 in Chicago. So this is a quote from him about a story, an Indian fable. There is a pretty Indian fable to the effect that if it rains when the star Swati is in ascendance, and a drop of rain falls into an oyster, that drop becomes a pearl. The oysters know this, so they come to the surface when the star appears, and wait to catch the precious raindrops. When the drops fall into them, quickly the oysters close their shells and dive down to the bottom of the sea, there patiently to develop the raindrops into pearls. You should be like that. First hear, then understand, and then, leaving all distractions, shut your minds to outside influences and devote yourselves to developing the truth within you. Isn't that a beautiful story? So I'll think of that whenever I see, I'm not sure what the star Swati is. I'll have to figure that out. But any star, I think, would do, right? So, and of course, the star is just to represent illumination. So we know that we need to find stillness. We do know that. But it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to find time in our society. I know I lived in Europe for a long time, and I lived in Latin America, and in Europe there are all these little parks everywhere, like in the middle of busy cities, a kind of cloistered little park that you could just go into and sit, and the churches I think they're all still open. Ours are all locked now. You can't even go into a church if you want to duck in somewhere. And then I lived in Latin America for a long time where people take the time. They just take it because they know that actually it's there in front of us. We think we don't have it, but it's actually, they have the same number of hours that we do. But they take the time to stop and say hello or to make a meal or whatever it is they need to do. So in this culture, it's particularly challenging to just be still. But in addition to that, it's challenging for the human mind to be still. Right? That's what they call the monkey mind. It's always chattering away and taking us into the future, all the things that are going to be coming, all the things we have to do, all the things that might happen to us. Or is going to the past. That person said this to me yesterday and now I hate myself and, whatever. Whatever happened or something I did that I wish I hadn't have done or anyway. So that's a very challenging place when we're always even when we sit down, our minds are not quiet. So I used to teach this class called The Ancient Art of Yoga to college students. And it was an interim class, interterm, winter session thing. So it was intensive. We did 39 hours in 3 weeks. So 3 hours a day. And an hour and a half of that was yoga philosophy and history. And then the other hour and a half was actual practice. So the first day of this course, I would give them, their assignment was to go home and sit for 15 minutes without doing anything else. So no TV, no phone, no homework, no reading, just sit. It was so challenging for these students. They came back the next day and like, oh my gosh, that was like, torture for these students. And of course, they also probably had a lot of other homework they needed to do. But the idea of sitting and doing nothing, it was just so challenging for them. So our mind is always busy, keeping us, jumping around and taking us out of the present moment. I found this quote by an Indian scholar named Shantideva. It's a little scary, but it was such an interesting picture. It says, a person whose mind is distracted dwells between the fangs of afflictive emotions. So, it's not the nicest image, but it's kind of true, Our mind is always just, taking us to all kinds of places, and then we miss out on the moment, and we're certainly not still. So there's a wonderful tradition within the Christian tradition, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, but it's contemplative prayer. And this book I've had for a while and actually never opened it until yesterday, I think it was, Into the Silent Land, a guide to the Christian practice of contemplation by Martin Laird. But it has a beautiful, beautiful description of that mind and, the challenge that we face. In order for awareness to begin to drop its many scarves of self-consciousness and reveal its core, that overflowing vastness whose ground is God, we must first grow still. This is precisely where we meet the struggle of the human condition. We cannot be still. Even if the body can be still, the mind keeps racing like a runaway train. So that image of the train of thoughts. Our bodies may be at a place of prayer, but our minds are usually not where our bodies are, but instead are at a shopping mall, on a beach in Mallorca, reliving an argument, fearing the future, making plans, regretting the past, any place but right here in the simplicity of the present moment. So I thought that was a really brought it into a nice picture. So, in my own attempt to find this stillness, I've practiced yoga for a long time, and many things can be meditative. Washing the dishes can be meditative if we'll just let go of everything else and be in that moment with what we are doing. And I've been practicing yoga, which is definitely a meditative experience for me, but I was not doing a seated meditation, and I felt like I'd come to the place where that was a missing piece from my own practice and that I needed to start that. So I guess it's been a couple of years now, I started that. And in the beginning, actually, I found it so enjoyable to sit down and do nothing. It was like this amazing gift. And I was working with a meditation teacher who has a Zazen practice, and her only guidance to me was there are no rules. All you have to do is sit, which was also very freeing because I wasn't trying to do anything. I was just sitting there. So in the beginning, it was great. Everything was nice. It's like, this is my time for vacation, just here on my mat, on my cushion, do my thing. But over time, I'm reading more, I'm studying more, and I started to become kind of obsessed with doing it right. Like, what was I doing? This wasn't the right technique. This is not working. This is not bringing me X, Y, Z. I'm not finding, some great illumination, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really struggling with this. I'm talking with my meditation teacher, and I'm like trying different techniques and, very busy doing in my meditation. And eventually in this same book, it just so happened that my daily readings started to, the progression where I found myself started to turn to this very problem. And saying that, this whole focus on doing it right makes us think that meditation doesn't work because we're in that mode of doing. And that actually what we have to do is stop trying to do it right and just sit there. Just sit there. And there are all kinds of different techniques you can use. Centering prayer uses a certain, often a scriptural passage or something like that. Many meditation techniques use a different mantra, a word to repeat, or a flame to look at, or, there's all kinds of techniques. But the main point is really just to sit there and begin to observe your thoughts. You're not going to shut down your mind. That's our fallacious thinking, is that we're going to stop our mind from doing its work. That's its job, is to think. And it's an important job. It's good that we can think, right? So it's not so much about stopping the mind. It's more about just allowing ourselves to, for a second, observe our thoughts, and then we will learn that, in fact, we are not our thoughts, which is huge, because we mostly think we are, right? We also think sometimes that we're the thoughts of other people, the opinions they have about us. One of my very favorite, I go to a 12-step program, Al-Anon, for the families of alcoholics, and one of my favorite phrases is, your opinion of me is none of my business. Isn't that great? Someone tells you something? So nice, but... So, Pema Chodron has this wonderful Buddhist teacher, has this to say, it is never too late for any of us to look at our minds. We can always sit down and allow the space for anything to arise. Sometimes we have a shocking experience of ourselves. Sometimes we try to hide. Often we get carried away. Without judging, without buying into our likes and dislikes, we can always encourage ourselves to just be here again and again and again. So we have this opportunity every day, which is so refreshing. I can recognize that after 6 months or something of struggling and feeling like it's not working, I can just start again today and go sit on my mat. So that's a really beautiful thing to think about. So I love this phrase, don't just do something, sit there. Turning that old phrase about don't just sit there, do something. Your mother probably told you that, right? So I love how that twists around. And I wanted to just talk for a little bit about some of these. I've talked a little bit already about some of the techniques, some of the ways that we have at our fingertips. There are many. I'm not going to touch on all of them, but just kind of to show that there are ways to bring us to this place of stillness. So there's all kinds of breath work. I had us do a couple of deep breaths before. That's always an amazing thing you can do. And you can do it anywhere, which is what I like. When people tell me they don't have time for yoga, I'm like, well, are you ever at a stoplight? Are you ever standing in a line? Do you ever have to wait for anybody? You can take a few breaths. That's already yoga, because we don't breathe deeply. And it has all kinds of physiological and neurological effects when we just take one deep breath. So that's always a good place to start. And I mentioned, the many types of meditation practices, which are becoming more and more popular. There's insight and vipassana and transcendental meditation, and, that also goes on. And there are many different traditions for meditation. One of them that we think about a lot is Buddhism. They have a very rich history of meditation practices and a lot of study about how it works. And it's interesting because the Buddhists, they're actually not so much focused on finding divinity, but simply awakening to the truth. But it's the same kind of idea that we have to find stillness so that we can awaken and see things clearly. In yoga philosophy, they talk about there being like a veil. You know, we're seeing through our likes and dislikes and our judgments and our opinions, we're seeing the world through this thick veil. And we think we see clearly, but actually there's all these things in the way. So there are many techniques in Buddhism for what's called calm abiding. And that is a state where the mind is intensely clear and steady. So those are the two main things, to clear the mind and then to have it be extremely steady. So that it is abiding. I love this word, abiding. Just resting and being, abiding constantly and flexibly on its chosen internal object. And then there's yoga, which is my favorite and what I know the most about, so I wanted to just share a little bit about that. And many of you know, yoga, the goal of yoga is really about yoking. Actually, the word yoga comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, which means yoke. So it's about yoking the human and the divine. And it's very interesting because I never kind of put this together until I was reading something the other day actually about Jesus. And of course, I know that he is presented as divinity embodied as a human person. So he is this perfect kind of combination of human and divine. And I never kind of put that parallel together with how yoga works. And in the Yoga Sutras, it's laid out right at the beginning that yoga, the second one says, yoga is the settling of the mind into stillness. And the next one says, tada drashtu svarupeya vashtanam. Tada, and when you do that, your mind will become clear and you'll be able to see the true nature of your brilliant divinity. So beautiful that it's just about, letting your mind be still, which of course is easier said than done. But there's a whole path, yoga is, in fact, it's one of the 6 schools of classical Indian philosophy, and it's the one that presents a practical application so that you can have some steps to find that. Somebody whose book I'm reading right now, Monette Chilson, a beautiful book called Sophia Rising, says yoga slows down the wheels of the mind enough for us to hear God speaking. So yoga does that, like meditation techniques also do that. And another philosopher from India, Putanpura, says yoga is yoking, uniting, an art and wisdom of being, which is light and unity. And that brought to mind a passage from Matthew. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest, very much like what we had for the daily word. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So the whole idea that it's when we bring ourselves into alignment with the divine, when we allow that stillness, then life is not so full of all these troubles because everything is clear. And when we get in that flow, life becomes easy rather than being a struggle. So Isaiah, too, there's a beautiful commentary about prayer, which of course was mentioned in the daily word and is also another amazing way to bring us into this stillness. It says, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you. So that's again that focus, just focusing on divinity. So I mentioned centering prayer. That's a beautiful practice that's actually been, it was inspired by the work of the Desert Fathers from many centuries ago, and then kind of formalized and brought back into presence by a Trappist monk named Thomas Keating. And if you'd ever like to go on an amazing retreat, I've not gone yet, but it is high on my list. The monastery where Thomas Keating works is above Snowmass in Colorado. And you can go stay there. If they have openings, you can go and just do a personal retreat there. And it's up above the tree line, very, very high. And I guess Thomas Keating said a spiritual retreat center, place where you go for spiritual retreat, should be hard to get to and hard to leave. So that's this place. But I actually talked to one of the brothers there, and they have this old, there's actually a whole network of these spiritual retreat centers that have this old monastic tradition of welcoming all who want to be there. So they take in individuals for retreats, and they do have a suggested donation. but they also will take you for whatever it is you can pay. And so when I was talking to this monk to reserve my room, he said, okay, so just go ahead and send in your $40 and I'll reserve these for you. But even if you don't send in your $40, I will reserve these for you. It was so cute. So I didn't get to go that time after all, but hopefully soon. So again, Martin Laird says, that centering prayer is an ancient way of praying that disposes the one who prays to the open depths within by drawing to stillness the wandering mind that flits and skitters all over the place. And in terms of prayer, too, I found this amazing, this rich material from Charles Fillmore in his book, Teach Us to Pray. So I wanted to read a little bit of what he has to say. The intellect is always very busy, jumping from one thing to another, much of the time dwelling on the daily routine of the workaday world or on conditions in the world at large. The first step in scientific silence is simply to still these outer intellectual thoughts so that the consciousness may become subservient to the spirit within. So that's that whole idea of being still so you can figure out, what spirit is trying to tell you. God works in the stillness. As man comes into the presence of God with his prayer, consciously unifying his mind with the mind of God, he is aware only of the soundlessness of God's word as it weaves itself in and out through the whole soul and body consciousness, illumining, redeeming, and restoring him. We have been so persistently taught that prayer consists in asking God for some human need that we have lost sight of our spiritual identity and have become a race of praying beggars. God is spirit in whom we live and move and have our being. We are the offspring of this spirit and can make conscious contact with it by turning our attention away from material things and thinking about spirit. As we practice this kind of prayer, our innate spirit showers its life energies into our conscious mind and a great soul expansion follows. Isn't that beautiful? These images. Constructive thought force is a great and mighty power, but when it is realized in the silence, it becomes the one and only power in all the earth. So pretty powerful stuff can happen when you'll just bring yourself into stillness. And there's, of course, also just going into nature to find stillness, which is something I used to do. I didn't even realize I had this contemplative practice kind of till later, but when I was in college and I felt very confused about what I should do or what needed to happen or just overwhelmed, I would just go sit in nature for 20 minutes. Well, I didn't have a designated time. I'd just go out and find a place and sit there. But I found that after about 20 minutes, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Everything became very clear, but it was just removing myself. And in this book, again, there was this wonderful quote by Shakespeare, actually, who says this about that. And this, our life exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Isn't that great? Just go out into nature and everything will become clear. You'll have all kinds of wisdom. So when I did this, sending out into the universe, asking for people's experiences, a few people actually sent me some really interesting things that had occurred to them or that had happened to them when they were focusing on this or just living life, this being versus doing. And I wanted to share a couple of those with you. The first one is from a friend of mine named Makara, who just did a yoga teacher training with me. And she said, last year, my word of the year for myself was be. It was so difficult at times. To just be meant I needed to let go more. It meant I needed to pause and accept what is. It meant I needed to be okay with a sense of emptiness for a while. Busyness kept me from the feeling of emptiness. And that's what my ego was protecting. By learning to just be, I learned to allow, accept, and embrace stillness and to let go. It was a great word to focus on and really shed so much light on my ego. And then another person shared this with me about her father. My father always told me I couldn't sing, but others always told me I could. I felt if I believed them, I would be betraying and disloyal to my father. It took quite some doing to overcome, but I have within the last year begun to sing more. I felt this urgency to catch up and was concerned about technique and performance, ego, which she also recognized that. But the spiritual message and fulfillment of my desire to sing was in the willingness to just be vulnerable enough to allow the song to be sung. Fear was replaced with the joy of sharing that beingness in sacred heart space and just letting the message come forth with heart and soul and simply allowing it to be all it could be. I had to recognize it was not about performance or ego or me. It was just about being. Isn't that beautiful? So we all have this opportunity when we're faced with something that we want to do but we feel we're not good enough or something, to just let it be. And then my last one I'm going to share is from Robin Stratton, who's an author and editor and writing coach. She said, "For years I was a writer who wrote. I was going to be the youngest person ever to win a Pulitzer, etc. As I got older, I began to realize that writing isn't about publishing. Writing is about writing. That's when I realized it wasn't about doing the writing. It was about being a writer. It took a ton of emotional angst off to write for the sake of writing. It was very liberating, and I became a better writer too." So in doing this work for this talk, I actually ended up almost preparing the next talk that I'll be back in March, and it will be more focused on the doing and how do we do then in a way that's really congruent with being ourselves and who we are and being with divinity. So that will come next time, but I do want to close with a quote that kind of sends us into that mode of thinking about that and how the two go together. It's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. "The miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the green earth in the present moment, to appreciate the peace and beauty that are available now. It is not a matter of faith. It is a matter of practice. We need only find ways to bring our body and mind back to the present moment so we can touch what is refreshing, healing, and wondrous." Thank you.